Hello and welcome to this interview with Ernst van Zyl, who is Head of Public Relations at AfriForum, and I think I've probably got to clear up, because we've got a lot of people outside of South Africa that might not be familiar with what AfriForum is. So it was established as an independent initiative in around 2006 of Solidarity, which is a predominantly Afrikaner trade union. And I suppose AfriForum acts as a non-profit civil rights organisation for Afrikaners. Is that about right?
That's about right. That's more right than a lot of other people get it, especially our opponents and the people that try to smear us. They completely miss the mark in regards to what we are and what our plans are. It would help if they actually read our website and all of the reports and things that we publish, listen to some of the interviews that we do. I mean, we don't hide anything. We spell out exactly what we are, what we want to achieve, and what our mission is. So the only real excuse for people out there to that are trying to claim that they have deciphered what AfriForum and the Solidarity movement is about. When they get it wrong, they don't really have an excuse because it's all out there. We literally make documentaries about what our plan is.
But if you haven't necessarily heard of AfriForum, you might have been seen on Twitter, or now X, I think it's called, as Conscious Caracal. That's how I first encountered you, I think. So,
Yeah.
getting right into it then, I suppose I'm going to ask a somewhat difficult question here, which is, how would you characterise the current state of governance in South Africa under the ANC? Which is a very broad question.
Well, Josh, I mean, the in South Africa is definitely not for beginners. If this were to be a political science class, I would definitely warn the audience or the class that we're going into very difficult and complex territory. But I mean, thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to decipher a little bit about what's going on here. I mean, South
Thank you for coming on.
Africa in general is still very much the dark continent, in the sense that in the past it was called the dark continent because people literally believed there was like monsters walking around, all these they didn't know what, there was absolutely no information coming out. It was fog of war times a million. It was genuinely an information blackout going on in regards to South Africa, all these tall tales coming out. But why I think it's still the dark continent is the fact that people in the 21st century mock our ancestors, for example, European ancestors, looking at Africa and drawing a lion, and it doesn't look like a lion at all, thinking that Africa, all these myths and legends out of Africa are true. But I don't think that's really apt, seeing as in the 21st century, a lot of people outside of Africa remain just as uninformed, just as fooled by many of the myths and legends and just tall tales coming from Africa. So I think it's very much still the dark continent information wise in that sense. And South Africa is no different. South Africa is also being part of Africa. It is trying to decipher South African politics, South African society, even in the 21st century, even in the information age, is a Herculean task. It is not for the faint of heart. It is not something that you're just going to do with an afternoon's worth of light reading. But let's start off with that complex, the difficult question. Let's get it out of the way. What's going on in South Africa? Well, in 2025, we are seeing the fruits of ANC rule in South Africa for the past 30 years. Now, I mean, there is a little bit of a complexity footnote that I have to add here without hopefully losing the audience. The ANC has been the one party ruling South Africa since 1994, the end of apartheid. But in 2024, the 2024 election, they did lose the election. They didn't get more than 50% of the vote. There's a lot of factors going into that. It's not as simple a story as just, oh, well, they just they weren't just as popular anymore and people were tired of them. It's absolutely not the case. There's a lot of other complex stuff going in there. But in 2024, South Africa got its first coalition government. But for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to keep referring to the South African government as if the ANC is still 100% in charge of it, because they've, since the coalition has been formed, the Government of National Unity, as it is called, the ANC have just been getting exactly what they've wanted. They've nowhere they've had to compromise, nowhere they've had to step back and say, all right, we're not going to go this far on this. They've pretty much just been given free rein still to push their agenda, even though they are now a 40% party as opposed to a 50% plus party. So as I said, just that little foundation for the rest of the conversation, I'm going to be referring to for all intents and purposes to the South African government, as of the ANC is still the sole party there, because that is the reality. So to sum up in regards to where do we find ourselves in 2025? Well, we find ourselves in the ANC's agenda of the National Democratic Revolution, which is their whole theory or their whole model for governance. And it's simply put that you should be constantly focusing on centralizing as much power in the hands of the state as possible. First, gaining power under the banner of liberalism, freedom for everyone, and all these human rights, then transitioning to socialism, and then transitioning to Marxism or communism. And I mean, this is not a conspiracy theory where you have to go dig in some rabbit hole to find this information. You can find this on the ANC's website. You can find this in their own document. So it's not even like you have to go in some dark information alley to find this plan. They reference it constantly, the National Democratic Revolution, or as they call it, the NDR. And that's where we find ourselves in 2025. Is still this master plan of the ANC is still on course.
So a lot of attention has been focusing on lots of, I suppose, infrastructural decline under the ANC rule. And obviously the country's had severe problems like energy and water infrastructure rarely seems to work in a large number of places. And one of the other things that perhaps went under the radar a little bit internationally, I don't know how it was perceived domestically, but I know that there was a Southern African Development Community force that was forced to withdraw from the Congo after the M23 rebels basically killed a fair few of them, and a disproportionate number were South African. And so that raised lots of questions about, is South Africa even able to defend itself if it has to?
Right. Yeah, I mean, you've been doing your homework. That's definitely one of the main challenges at the moment, is the South African military that is just dysfunctional on an increasing amount of fronts. An air force that I think at most has 3 fighter jets that are operational, a navy that is in complete disarray, armed forces that is genuinely just every year we read in the newspapers about how this is now the end financially for the South African military. Their money has run out. I mean, you can just Google very, very simply South African military bankrupt, and you'll get hundreds of stories just detailing the financial woes of the South African military. It's in a horrible state. So absolutely right. That's one of the many fronts where you see this, what we call state decay in South Africa. And I think that's the story of the past 3 years, is state capacity decay, where the state, as I said earlier, the ANC has this mission of wanting to centralize as much power as possible in the hands of the government. They want all these responsibilities, but they simply can't, and increasingly so, meet these responsibilities. The best example would be electricity. I mean, in South Africa, we have electricity monopoly in the state power monopoly called Eskom, which is supposed to provide the country with electricity. But for the past 15 years, well, no, actually, no, it's now 2025, and the electricity crisis started in 2007. That means that's 17 years. No, yeah, 18 years. The electricity crisis in South Africa is old enough to vote. The electricity crisis started in 2008. I remember, I was still a schoolboy at the time. I remember hearing over the radio on our drive to school that the government was announcing rolling blackouts are going to be instituted this evening. So around 2007, 2008, this what we call load shedding, which is just a euphemism for rolling blackouts, starts, and it is still a crisis that's ongoing in 2025. Just the other day, we had load shedding once again. So the government has had 18 years of grappling with this crisis, and they can't solve it. And just a little bit of a fact there to put it all into perspective. I mean, in 2000, was it in 2003, I think, if I remember correctly, Eskom, the state power monopoly, was named the electricity company of the year, somewhere there at the turn of the century. I might get the year by 1 or 2 years off, but there around 2003, Eskom, the state power monopoly, got international award for being one of the best power generation companies in the world. And now, 20 years later, they've just admitted defeat almost. It seems like nobody believes the state anymore when they say, well, they're going to solve this problem. It's one of these days there will be no more rolling blackouts. It's still a problem today, and that's not even talking about the power outages that we experience in between the state-induced rolling blackouts due to copper cable theft, due to infrastructure decay. The other day, a electricity substation just caught on fire, massive explosion there, and then massive parts of the city's power just went off because the maintenance is not being done, and it's just everything is slowly decaying due to a lack of maintenance from the government side. And I think that's at the root of the problem as well, is that the word maintenance doesn't really factor into the ANC's vocabulary. They try to build very shiny things, but they don't really maintain the things that exist, like, for example, key infrastructure. The other day, they did finish building a new coal power station that had been in construction for, I think, almost 20 years now. The project, I think oh, well, not, it's between 10 to 15 years, if I remember correctly. It's called Medupi Power Station. And the other day it was reported that due to corruption, fund mismanagement, just project bloat over the years, Medupi Power Station, that was finished now, I think this year, is officially now the most expensive coal power station in the history of humanity. And it's not because it is the most advanced one that humanity has ever built. It's just been one of these power stations that has been in construction for over a decade now and just racking up costs. But that's the typical. That's almost like a metaphor for the ANC's rule in South Africa. Is all these major projects that just keep racking up costs due to corruption and mismanagement.
That leads us on very nicely, actually, to our next question, which is, do you see a lot of this decline as the result of incompetence, ideology, corruption, or probably most likely a mix of all three of those things?
It's the disgusting cake where all these horrible ingredients have just been thrown together. I think it's definitely a mixture of all of that. I mean, there is definite one of the main issues is the corruption. I mean, South Africa just has it is one of the most corrupt governments in the world. One of the funny things that happened, Dricus du Plessis, the MMA fighter or the UFC fighter, he was doing an interview and he just doesn't care what people think about what he says. And he said in an interview, South Africa's government is the most corrupt in the world. And then the South African government officials took a lot of offense because South Africa is officially not the most corrupt. I think it's like the third or the fourth most corrupt in the world. So they wanted him
Well, that makes
to
a
get
big
his facts
difference.
straight. But I mean, I've got some facts here about corruption in South Africa that I think paints the picture quite well. So in 2021, there was a poll among South Africans about corruption, and 70% of respondents believe the government is performing fairly badly or very badly in fighting corruption. 71% believe corrupt officials often or always go unpunished. So that's definitely one of the main factors there. But we can't ignore also just general mismanagement, incompetence, and this comes from it's baked into the cake. So it's baked into the ANC cake through their own model of cadre deployment. So cadre deployment it forms part of the National Democratic Revolution. It's part of the formula, but it's your bog standard Marxist idea that when you gain power as a party, you need to then your first priority then needs to be to deploy party loyalists, cadres, as the ANC or the communist vocabulary calls them, into every single facet, every tentacle of the state. No matter how small the office, no matter how trivial the government apparatus there, or the government the how trivial a part of the government machine, it has to be filled by a cadre, a party loyalist, loyal to the ANC. So for the past 30 years, they have been again, openly, this is a term they use. They've been doing what they call cadre deployment, deploying party loyalists to every single facet of the government throughout the machine of the state. And these cadres that they deploy, their deployment is not, the criteria for whether they are deployed to a certain position or not is not based on merit or on their expertise or their experience. It is based on the amount of loyalty they have to the ruling party specifically. So that's where the incompetence comes in. It's just people being deployed to jobs that they have no idea how to do, that they have no experience in doing. And then, of course, lastly, and you mentioned this, it is then the third part of this failure trifecta is the ideological component. It's just, I know there's a lot of exaggeration in our time of people just calling people they hate either far left or far right, anyone that disagrees with them, particularly on the left, they call anyone far right that disagrees with them. But the ANC is genuinely a party that has a Marxist foundation, a communist foundation. I mean, the ANC is literally in an official alliance with the South African Communist Party. The South African Communist Party, the SACP, does not compete in South African elections because they are in an agreement with the ANC that when the ANC wins an election, representatives from the South African Communist Party are deployed to government positions, so they don't have to compete in elections. They have an official alliance with the South African Communist Party. It's called the Tripartite Alliance. And I mean, we've had ministers of finance in the past that were members of the South African Communist Party. So it's not an exaggeration when you call the South African government out for its Marxist and communist foundations. It is like explicit. It's not a conspiracy. It's not even you have to play with the terminology to make it work. No, it's explicitly has a far left foundation, a Marxist and a communist foundation. And you can see it in their deployments, and you can just Google the Tripartite Alliance if you want a little bit more context there. So just to sum up, I think you're absolutely correct in regards to the different elements, and you have to combine them all to really get the picture on what's going on. It's not a single element; it is the combination of all those just horrible influences on the South African society and government: ideology, mismanagement, and corruption.
Absolutely. And one thing I'm very curious about is that we're starting to see some of these infrastructural failings in, for example, European countries. We actually had a case where a power station near Heathrow Airport in London went out, and half of London and several airports actually had to ground their flights, and there's no electricity. And there's a sort of growing interest in what is the most sort of under-acknowledged or most significant infrastructural failing in South Africa, because a lot of people outside of it see this as a template for the future, I suppose.
Absolutely. I mean, South Africa tells you a lot about the nature of collapse. So a lot of people think about collapse as something that is akin to like an explosive going off or a bomb going off, but that's not how collapse works. Collapse happens little by little. Like every day your country is 0.1% worse than the day before. You don't wake up one morning in a collapsed country or a collapsed system. That's a bit of the simplified idea that you often find online of people talking about the end of their society or this apocalyptic collapse that happens one day, just like immediately. But that's not how it works. It's one extra piece of graffiti on the road that you walk to work. It's an old lady getting mugged on a street where she was usually safe to walk down. It's a gravestone that's been vandalized. That's what collapse looks like. All these little cracks just accumulating and accumulating on top of each other. And infrastructure in South Africa is particularly where you see this come to the fore. I mean, I've mentioned the electricity crisis, but it's all the infrastructure. It's not just electricity, it's the road infrastructure, it is the bridges, it is the sewage infrastructure, it's the water infrastructure. I mean, South Africa is currently entering, to add insult to injury, a water crisis where our water infrastructure all across the country just can't support the population anymore. Increasing amounts of communities are suffering water outages, water that's not fit for human consumption. We've had major incidents over the past few years as well of communities, the water quality getting so bad that you have mass deaths of people getting cholera and all these horrible diseases from drinking water because the infrastructure is just collapsing, the water infrastructure, government-induced collapse of the infrastructure because the authorities just aren't maintaining this infrastructure, and the population keeps growing. So you just have this increase in pressure on an infrastructure that's like decades old. So, and specifically sewage as well, there's major problems. A lot of sewage is just being dumped into our rivers and dams and into nature here in South Africa because there's just not enough plants to refine it or to clean it. So that's, again, I think the thing that South Africa teaches you about collapse is that it is not something that happens overnight. It's not something that happens suddenly. It is just increasingly you notice the quality of the society around you starts deteriorating just little by little. And increasingly socially, you realize South Africanization entails your country also just increasingly becoming lower and lower trust society in regards to the type of behaviors that you notice around you just start deteriorating morally as well, and that's one of the memes that I often mock a lot of people in America and the United States with, is that whenever their social ills just keep increasing, and at one point they're going to have to make peace with the fact that they are now living in a low trust society. They better start believing in low trust societies. You're living in one.
Oh yeah, don't I know it? It's very much getting that way in Britain as well. Certainly parts of it, and I think that people took a lot for granted, both in South Africa and Europe and North America, that things would always stay that way, and it's not necessarily the case. But
Yeah, and it's a simple criteria for what a low trust society is. A low trust society means that if a stranger, this is not some scientific gauge, it's just my own little gauge, is that you know you live in a low trust society when a stranger approaches you in the supermarket or in the street or in a safe environment, let's say in a supermarket, and your first instinct is to think, why are they beelining for me? Are they trying to exploit me in any way? Are they trying to hoodwink me in any way? Are they trying to harm me in any way? Then you know you are in a low trust society. When someone approaches you directly, a stranger, and your default instinct is not a positive one, but a negative one, a negative association with the stranger, that then you know you're in a low trust society.
seems perfectly reasonable to me because, of course, a key component of trust is feeling safe, and if your initial reaction is to feel threatened, then it must be that, surely. So zooming out a considerable amount here, what do you think of the ANC seemingly further aligning itself with countries like Iran, China, and Russia, and the recent conflict with the United States and the West more generally, I suppose?
Right. There's a fascinating divide there as well, because on the one side, if you look at South Africa just political wise or like political rhetoric wise and vibe wise, you as an outsider looking in, you would just see, oh well, they're parts of BRICS. They're very increasingly friendly with Russia and China and Iran. Of course, this country is realigning themselves, but then you zoom out a bit further and you look at the bigger picture, the economic picture, and then you realize that South Africa is still incredibly dependent on Europe and the United States for trade, but to a very large extent, which means that when it comes to specifically the bigger picture, I think the ANC very, if this was a real-time strategy game, the ANC would have loved to just realign with the click of a button with the BRICS countries, trade wise, military wise, political wise, but it's not that simple. South Africa's economy is heavily tied to the United States economy and the European economy, the economies of Europe, which means that realignment is, again, even if there's a lot of will from the ANC side to want to make it happen, no amount of will is going to make that happen overnight or very quickly. They're trying their damnedest. They're trying their best to realign South Africa increasingly with the nations of China, Iran, Russia, all that entire sphere, but it's taking a lot of time. And the other thing that's also important to note is that the ANC is aware of this. They're not oblivious to the fact that South Africa is increasing, not in, South Africa is still heavily reliant on trade with the West, because they're trying to play this double personality, or the split personality, very schizophrenic of them. On the one side, they're very pro BRICS countries in their rhetoric abroad and their antics abroad. But then at the same time, when they do visit the United States, when they do visit European countries, they're also trying to smooth up everyone that they meet. They talk about this important relationship that we have with these countries, and we want to strengthen that relationship. They're not always openly taking one side, even though they have made some incredibly just reckless blunders the past few months, particularly to almost actively sabotaging the relationship between South Africa and the United States. The past 2 months can be described as nothing else than a diplomatic crisis between the Trump administration and the South African government. But I mean, there's a reason why. On the one side, you have literally the author of the art of the deal saying, come to the negotiating table, let's make a deal. And on the other side, you have the ANC, the art of the no compromise, the art of the double down, saying, no, we're not going to compromise on anything. In their words, we will not be bullied. Well, you're one of the smallest kids on the playground, and you're taking on a 6-foot child. You're going to get bullied. You can't just scream in his face, "I will not be bullied." You're gonna have to make another plan. So when it comes to the bigger picture there, to sum up, I think politically the ANC wish they could realign the country immediately with the click of a button with the BRICS sphere, but economically it's not going to happen overnight. Economically, South Africa for the foreseeable future is going to still be heavily tied to the United States and to Europe and the Western sphere.
So I'm not entirely sure whether they've actually gone ahead and are effective, but I have heard the US talking about sanctions on South Africa. So this would probably stand to have a very real effect then, and would give the United States a fair amount of leverage to influence domestic politics and I suppose geopolitics as well, because if you have that amount of power over a country's economy, then this is how the United States sort of its soft power empire works, is that they apply economic pressure. And if South Africa is so dependent on them, as well as Europe, who I don't think will necessarily stand in their way when it comes to South Africa, then Trump's intervention is quite significant. And what do you think is likely to happen there?
So Trump holds a lot of cards in his hand. I mean, this is not an even matchup between. I mean, it's bizarrely how the ANC are trying to cope with the situation by saying, well, we need you and you need us. I'm like, not really. Economically, the United States imports a lot of products from South Africa, luxury products and fruits and other agricultural things and raw materials that it does need, but it can live without. Economic sanctions from the Trump administration on South Africa would be catastrophic, to put it lightly. And the Trump administration and the South African government know that. They're not oblivious to that fact. On AfriForum's side, I mean, we're going to get into AfriForum a bit more in detail in a moment, but just a quick note on that. We don't want to see South Africa as a whole sanctioned by the United States, because that would punish the regular citizens and normal people of South Africa. Our whole stance is that if sanctions are put on South Africa, those sanctions need to be targeted, laser targeted, on those politicians pushing these destructive policies, inciting violence against minorities, those politicians that are actively destroying South Africa. Those politicians need to feel the pain, but not the regular citizens of South Africa are already punished by their foolish and policies and destructive policies of the ruling party. They don't deserve a second punishment. But you're absolutely right. Both the United States and South Africa are very, very intimately aware of the fact that the Trump administration holds all the cards in their hand when it comes to negotiation, especially if you have the economic nuclear weapon of economic sanctions. That would be absolutely devastating for the South African economy, as I said, to put it mildly.
Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that kicked all of this off was the Land Expropriation Bill, which, to the audience, if they're not familiar, it allowed the South African government, or the ANC, to seize any property without justification, really.
Well, they
I
can
know they
use
say
they
that there
can
has
use
to
the
be a
criteria
yeah.
of public interest, but I mean that's
That's so
as subjective as it
subjective.
gets.
Exactly, yeah. It's so subjective that it's not really a proper justification, and they can do this without providing any compensation. And so it's
Mm.
basically the eradication of property rights. And as many people understand, it would be targeting the white minority in South Africa. And when I've been covering this, I've seen a lot of people outside of South Africa saying, well, the persecution there is so bad. They've seen things about the farmland murders and
Mm.
things like that. And a lot of people say, well, it's so bad that why aren't people leaving? Why are people there
Mm.
in the first place? And I think one of the important things here is understanding the character of the political persecution of the white minority in South Africa, and how would you perhaps explain that to someone who's not experienced it firsthand?
Right. So I'll give the short answer and then the long answer. The short answer is a Moroccan saying that goes, "My country is my country, even when I'm treated unfairly there." And you have to, if you understand the character of the Afrikaners and the white minority in general, but specifically in particular the Afrikaners, you'll understand why there is not just why it's not as easy a decision just to leave. I mean, let's just take my own case study personally. I mean, I'm the ninth generation of my family living in South Africa. My first ancestor came here in 1688. I mean, that's before the United States was a country. I challenge your audience to think back what was happening in Britain in 1688. I mean, that's a long way ago. That's a long time ago. And I mean, that's the story of almost every Afrikaner family. We've been here for 8, 9, 10, 11 generations, most of us. My wife's family as well have been here since 1707. So when it comes to particularly the Afrikaners, it's a rootedness. It is a tie to a place, a, an element of your identity that you can't really put a monetary or material value on. So I think that kind of helps explain why it is not just as simple of a decision of leaving. There are many that have left. I think there has been hundreds of thousands of Afrikaners, white South Africans, black South Africans as well, that have immigrated over the past decades from South Africa. Those people, I'm not going to attack or shame them. It's a deeply personal decision. That's something you yourself personally make. You make the best decision for your family. I personally have decided to stay for the reasons I set out. The fact that it feels like it doesn't seem like the right end to the epic story of my family here at the southern tip of Africa just to leave, but that's my own personal reasoning. And also there's a lot of other factors in there as well. I've written extensively about it in my own personal capacity. But now, I mean, now's the element of whether to stay or leave really comes down to, at the end of the day, millions of the white minority in South Africa either can't leave or do not want to leave. It's not as simple, even if with Trump's refugee program on the table, the details have not been made clear. We're still waiting to get all the full details and criteria of that resettlement program. So I mean, any conversation in that direction would be pure speculation. But even with that on the table, millions of white South Africans will still be here next year and the year after that and the year after that. And there's complex reasons for that. But I mean, the main reason on the one side, it's not as easy to just pack up and leave. There is physical and material reasons for it. But then also there is non-material spiritual reasons for it as well, being rooted in a place, being the ninth or 10th or 11th generation of your family somewhere, not having any other home. I think that's the difference, particularly between the Afrikaners and many of the British subjects throughout Africa when colonialism ended, is that they had a home to return to or to flee to or to be ordered back to. Afrikaners didn't have that type of home. Afrikaners are a mix of Germans, French, Dutch, and also many of the British peoples as well. The Anglos also intermixed there too. So we don't have, and it's there's not one of those genetic or ethnic influences that really dominates, which mean or majorly dominates, which means that we don't have an external home to Southern Africa. This is the place where our culture was formed, where our language was formed, and our language of Afrikaans. I mean, our culture and our language are both named after the continent. That should tell you everything you need to know. Afrikaners and Afrikaans both contain Africa. So there's also a part of the puzzle. But to sum up, in regards to whether to stay or leave, it's not as simple. Everyone will have a different answer, but it is a deeply personal matter, and it is a complex matter. I can't really talk for everyone. I can't really give you access to everyone's heart and what's going on in there. But from my own personal experience, it is very much non-material reasons, spiritual reasons, things that you can't put a value or a monetary value to.
I understand perfectly, because I've had people from the United States saying, why don't you come and move over here? There's nothing in Britain for you anymore. Look at it. It's becoming worse. And I've said to them that as much as I appreciate that, and it's a very kind thing to say, I believe that a culture shapes the land, and therefore the land shapes the culture in return. There's this exchange, and it gets to a point after
I think
several generations.
I think in our globalized world, we've lost some sight of the importance of place. So I'm glad to hear that you also feel that connection. I think it's an important aspect of our humanity that people have we've kind of ignored for a long time in the increasing globalized world.
Mm-hmm. I think in many ways, because Great Britain's so parochial, that it's a lot easier to make those sorts of arguments, because even within England alone, there are parts where you don't necessarily feel as at home. Like I grew up in Devonshire in the southwest. Outside of that, it doesn't necessarily feel as much like home, because the land shapes who you are. And I think that the cost there is that were you to move, you've lost a little bit of yourself in a sense. That's the way I see it. And it seems like we're coming at it from the same sort of direction there.
Absolutely. I mean, you are a product of the place that you grew up in, that you were formed by. And that place often is not just the physical attributes of it, it is all the other unseen elements as well. There in where you grew up, the school that you went to, the families in the street that you grew up in, the types of values that you were exposed to, the little nuances of that makes humanity interesting. I mean, that's unfortunately the time that we're living in, is the fact that, I mean, humanity is this, just metaphorically, this rainforest of just different peoples and cultures, and that's what makes it amazing and interesting. But there's people out there that want to reduce it just to a pine tree plantation where all the trees are planted in nice little rows. They all look the same. It's a sterile forest, and it's perfect to be just cut down and pulped for industrial use. And I mean, that there's the Afrikaner philosopher Impie van Wyk Louw summed it up beautifully when he said that humanity is an orchestra of different languages and cultures, the orchestra of God. And if you are and there are people out there are forces out there that want to reduce it to a single instrument, to a lonely flute, and those people are genuinely evil. They want to reduce this beautiful orchestra of humanity, all the different cultures and peoples out there, just to one homogenous, like, gray goo. And that's incredibly evil. I mean, that's what we're up against. Is those little nuances that you were mentioning there as well, the place that you grew up in. They want to, the people that think in this way, the globalists and the people in that sphere, genuinely don't want that difference. They want to wipe out all those little nuances. Everything needs to be, I mean, the best word for it would be standardized. Everything needs to be standardized. Humanity needs to be standardized. As my friend Russell Lamberti says, humanity needs to be made legible for all the different states that are going to administer it, or the mega state that's going to administer it. And cultural differences, linguistic differences, ethnic differences, that all gets in the way of this machine that wants efficiency and legibility and standardization.
I 100% agree with that. So moving on to what's actually being done in South Africa to push back against some of the bad things happening. I suppose we may as well get on to AfriForum and the Solidarity Movement. And would you be able to outline roughly what they do?
Yes.
Because I think many people are unfamiliar. And how does AfriForum's sort of core mission differ from the broader Solidarity Movement as well? Because, of course, it's independent but linked, as I understand it, at least.
Right. So AfriForum and the Solidarity Movement is the other side of the coin of the story that we've been talking about now for this episode. On the one side of the coin, you have the story of state capacity decay, of slow motion collapse. Just think of like a video of a car just slamming into a wall in ultra slow motion. That's South Africa. Some parts of it may be worse than others in regards to the collapse, but that's on the one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is, but this void, this power vacuum is being created, and something has to fill it. Just as nature abhors a vacuum, politics and power also abhors a vacuum. And that vacuum can only be filled by one of two factions, the good guys or the bad guys. The bad guys are organized crime, good guys are communities organizing. And South Africa is a place where both of those are flourishing, organized crime and communities that are organizing. So, and there's a reason for it, because there's this vacuum being created. So on the organized crime side, we have a water mafia, we have an electricity mafia, we have a construction mafia, we have just South Africa is a playground for organized crime, some of the most advanced organized crime operations you'll find anywhere in the world. And then also the good guys are the communities organizing, and that's where the Solidarity Movement and AfriForum come in. So the Solidarity Movement starts in 1907 as a solidarity, a Afrikaner Christian labor union, but a labor union not from the leftist tradition, but from the Christian tradition. I think there's just a little bit of homework maybe for your audience that's very curious. Go look into the Christian tradition of labor unions in Europe as well. That's what inspired the Solidarity Movement to form. And that labor union started growing, and then it realized, well, we want to expand into other areas that a labor union doesn't really have any business in being in. So the Solidarity Labor Union or trade union then starts creating different organizations in a network that all specialize in different facets of trying to build a future for Afrikaners at the southern tip of Africa. So they start AfriForum in 2006. AfriForum, the civil rights organization, or constitutional rights in the South African context, and then also community-based solutions. So AfriForum's whole model is a membership-based model. So AfriForum is the largest community-based solutions organization on the African continent based on membership, but membership not in the sense of you like a Facebook page or fill in a form and then you're a member. You have to be an active donating member every month to be considered a member. So AfriForum has 315,000 members. And we use the funds from those members to do various things. So we're basically filling that void that I described earlier from as many angles as possible. So on the one side, we have our branches. So AfriForum has over 170 branches all across the country in South Africa. And South Africa is a massive place. We haven't even got into that yet. South Africa is the size of Western Europe without Spain. So when you look at that massive area, there's 170 AfriForum branches all across it, and they do everything from, well, firstly, they organize communities, but they organize communities to address the particular issues that those communities are affected by in their vicinity, in their immediate place. So those are planting trees, cleaning up rivers, picking up rubbish, maintaining infrastructure, filling potholes. As I said earlier, we talked about the just falling apart of infrastructure. Potholes are rife in South Africa. So AfriForum fills thousands of potholes every year all across the country. And then there's the safety side of it. So we've got 175 neighborhood watches all across the country as well. And these aren't your grandma's neighborhood watch with pepper spray and binoculars. These are well-trained, well-equipped people keeping their community safe in a very hostile environment, but all within the confines of the law. They're not vigilantes that can just be judge, jury, and executioner. They actually work quite well with local police in regards to keeping their community safe. Our friction with the government is that national at a high level. That's where the most friction we encounter. On a local level, the local police chief is just completely overwhelmed by the crime wave that they have to deal with, understaffed, under-resourced. Here comes AfriForum and says, we've started a new neighborhood watch. Do you want to cooperate, share intel, do operations together? Local police stations are just like, yeah, get on board. Here's some work for you to help us out with. So on a local level, there's cooperation, very good cooperation between the police and our neighborhood watches as well. I did a episode on my YouTube channel, my Conscious Caracol YouTube channel, where I specifically went on patrol with an AfriForum neighborhood watch to show people what it's like, and to show you what's going on there. So that's the community solutions side. And I mean, all of this is done through volunteers. So it's not people get paid to do this. It's communities coming together. AfriForum helps on the organization side, the equipment side, the resources side. But the people that are running these branches, the people that are volunteering at these branches aren't earning a salary. They're doing it because they have to. Otherwise, their communities are going to fall apart. Slowly but surely. So we've got, I think, our whole model is based on about 11,000 volunteers on the ground actively every month, being organized and taking part very, very explicitly in their communities. And that's on top of the 315,000 donating members that give money every month so that we can do these community-based operations. But also we have the court case side as well. So we've got the civil rights side, where we take the government to court for abuses of power, laws that target people's private property rights, laws that abuse minorities, laws that target minority communities on base of language, race, or culture. But then also just cases that benefit all South Africans, where we fight for basic constitutional rights like freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom of expression. These types of cases we take on as well. So that's the legal side of what we do as well. But I mean, that's the rough overview. And then just the last point on the solidarity movement itself, it has now expanded to a network. It's now in 2025, a network of 50 plus organizations and institutions, all specializing in different fields to build that future for Africa, ensure a future for Afrikaners at the southern tip of Africa, where we are safe and free. But also it's an initiative where many other communities in South Africa also benefit. The whole of South Africa benefits from less potholes, safer streets, safer neighborhoods, maintained infrastructure, and planted trees, rubbish pickup initiatives. And then AfriForum has other projects that we are pioneering at the moment as well. They're still in an early stage, but we're already stress testing them in reality. A private firefighting unit that's been very successful, a private rubbish removal initiative where we have a rubbish removal truck and everything in Bloemfontein, a city here in South Africa. And that's a major success as well. And we're going to expand it to other cities. And then there's also, if we have time, we can get into it, but there's also all the other different organizations within the solidarity movement that have their own focus. So just to name one or two, we have Soltech, which is our technical college that we crowdfunded. It's a technical college campus that has almost 3,000 students at this time, educating the plumbers, builders, electricians, the tradesmen of the future in Afrikaans. And that campus was built through Solidarity, the Solidarity Labor Union, asking its members whether they are willing to give a 10 Rand extra per month. I think that's less than 50 cents in pound terms per month to a building fund, so that they can then invest those funds and save them up to build a technical college campus, which was then built and finished under time and under budget in 2020. So that's another aspect of the solidarity movement, is building our own educational institutions where where the youth can be educated in their mother tongue of Afrikaans, which is also under attack from the South African government in primary school level, high school level, and especially at university level.
So my next question was actually something that you've addressed slightly, and one thing that has been a major question of mine is that with a lot of the Solidarity and AfriForum actions, they've seen such successes, and it's grown so much that I've seen certain people describe it almost as like a parallel government, and I would have thought that the ANC and the state would be a lot more punitive of such things, because this might just be my British mind. You know, we can't really even build so much as a shed without the government say so, and planning permission and the likes. And
I always joke, 1984 could only have been written by an Anglo. No other parallel universe exists where a non-Anglo wrote that novel.
it's very true. We love our bureaucracy for some reason. But
Wow.
I've got basically two questions here. The first of
Sure.
which is quite simple: is that it seems like it's simply necessity that a lot of these things aren't challenged. Obviously, you've got the political realm, the national realm, where there's a back and forth. But I was under the impression that for the coordination with the United States, wasn't AfriForum branded treasonous at some point?
Right. Yeah, so that's, I mean, that's one of the common questions that we often get is that why are you building, even bothering to build anything? Isn't the state just going to come and smash it at one point? And that's a question we often get. But I mean, Flip Base, the head of the Solidarity Movement, has a fantastic quote that he always uses when he gets that question, where he says, "On the one side, yes, there was always going to be a risk in trying to build anything with a hostile state hovering over you, but the other option was to do nothing, and then defeat is certain." So we're taking that risk, but I mean, at the same time, there's also a more pragmatic side to it, and that's the fact that we're not breaking any laws, we're not doing anything illegal. There is no way that the South African government could, for example, really prosecute us for anything because there's no laws being broken. Are they? The treason investigation into AfriForum and the delegation that we sent to the United States is concerning, but I mean, there's no basis for it. South Africa's legal system or our judiciary is still relatively functional. I mean, a lot of ideological creep has happened. I mean, as you see in the United States as well, a lot of ideology seeping into it increasingly, but it is still relatively reliable as it is in the United States to some degree. So there's not really a legal route for the ANC to take on AfriForum or the Solidarity Movement because we're not breaking any laws. And at the same time, we have a support base of, well, official membership base of 315,000. The Solidarity Movement has over 600 members. If you combine all the members of all the 50 different institutions and organizations, that's an awful lot of people. And I mean, that's when it comes to particularly the state challenging anything that we're building. I mean, what do you do in that situation? Well, then you defend it. And when it comes to specifically AfriForum and the Solidarity Movement, we've built up to this point a capacity to be able to defend ourselves legally, constitutionally, but also physically in regards to our if any of our communities were to be threatened by just random violence or targeted violence, we've got a community-based security network all across the country of over 175 neighborhood watchers that are well equipped and well trained. People that are, I mean, we had a stress test of what if South Africa were to be hit by mass waves of anarchy? What would happen with your security network? How would it perform? Well, that happened in 2021. In 2021, South Africa was subjected to the worst riots and looting that the country had seen since 1994. Hundreds of people dead, billions of rands of damage and looting happened. And what we did in that situation was we sent out a message to all of our neighborhood watchers, all of our community safety networks to secure their communities, make sure that it's safe, all the points of entry are safe, and that if they were to be the target of these looters and rioters, that they can use their capacity as community-based security structures to, with cooperation with alongside the police, secure their neighborhoods. And all the neighborhoods where our neighborhood watchers were active and securing them came out on the other side. So, I mean, that was a major stress test for this model of ours, and we passed it with flying colors. So at the end of the day, the future is unpredictable. I can't sit here and say everything that we build is guaranteed safety. They will not be challenged or sabotaged or attacked in any way. Of course, that option always exists, but then there's the two-pronged response to that. On the one side is the fact that, well, the other option would be to do nothing and just accept that everything is futile and I mean, we're not going to be doing that because then defeat is certain. Then on the other side, I always use the metaphor of the porcupine strategy, where so in South Africa we have, and I think this will tie it up nicely in regards to what we are doing, our philosophy of a porcupine philosophy to a certain extent. So we have got a massive nature reserve in South Africa called the Kruger National Park, and it's the size of a small country. It's massive, absolutely massive, and it's filled with any type of major African predator that you can imagine: lions, leopards, hyenas, everything. But it's also full to the brim with badgers and with porcupines. But how can that be? It's filled with predators that can munch these little critters anytime they want. Well, a lot of these smaller animals have adapted and have amazing asymmetric defense strategies and mechanisms to keep themselves safe. So I mean, that's what AfriForum and the Solidarity Movement is metaphorically doing, is we are increasingly becoming what we call state proof in regards to our initiatives. But then also we are following a porcupine and a badger strategy by making sure that we have spikes to defend ourselves and that we have a thick skin like a badger. And the proof of concept that you just have to check out is go look on YouTube, badger versus leopards, or porcupine versus lions, or porcupine versus leopards. And you'll see that even though it's a much smaller animal, the asymmetric strategies, nature is full of successful asymmetric strategies, asymmetric defense strategies. And that's I think the lesson from nature that we are philosophically taking as AfriForum and Solidarity as well, is that it is, and not just nature, human history is filled with examples of asymmetric defense strategies that means that it's not just a done deal or a guarantee that if you are lesser in number or lesser in power or firepower or whatever metric that you're using, that it is just written in the stars that you are going to be destroyed or dominated in all facets. And that's why even in 2025, we're continuing to build, we're continuing to state proof ourselves, we're continuing to increase our capacity to be able to ensure a future here at the southern tip of Africa. And that's what we're going to continue to do.
So I think in many ways you're actually understating the stress test that many of these institutions went through, because in 2021 I actually wrote about a lot of the riots.
So you were keeping an eye on the country already then?
I was, yeah. Because at the time I had no idea what was going on, and that's where everything began. But one thing that I can remember, if my memory serves me correctly, is that Durban is, the major port in South Africa, is it not? Or at least one of them.
One of the major ports are Durban and Cape Town.
And many of the distribution centres there got burnt to the ground. And outside of South Africa, you might think, okay, well, that's not too bad, but they were all centred in one place. And so for a very long time, it may have even been for a full year afterwards, if not more, this infrastructure didn't come back. And so there wasn't the capacity to bring in goods into South Africa. And so for a considerable amount of time, there was a massively reduced number of imports, from what I understand, at least. So that if you're able to weather that storm,
even during that crisis of the Houthis attacking freight ships, I think it was it 2 years ago, or was it last year? In the past 2 years, and a lot of the ships were diverted to go to return to tradition and go past the Cape of Good Hope. South Africa was not positioned to be able to take full advantage of that diversion of cargo, because for the reasons that you outlined there, our ports were firstly already crippled just by mismanagement and corruption. Again, government monopoly, Transnet. But at the same time, also due to destruction, as you rightly pointed out, in the ports of Durban.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did look at this. Wasn't it that they would deliberately avoid South Africa because
they tried their best,
reasons,
wherever possible, because they were going to, when they get to South Africa, they were going to stand in line to get into port for days, sometimes for weeks.
Okay, so I suppose we may as well look to the future, and one of the questions that when I've said I was doing this interview, most people were keen to find out about, being from abroad, is that Do you see any other countries that are following in the footsteps of South Africa? Because I've seen many people using South Africa as an example as the destination for a lot of Western Europe and North America, sort of the Anglosphere countries more generally.
Mm. So your question is what lies ahead for South Africa in regards to maybe the situation deteriorating or improving?
Hmm.
All right. So on the one, I mean, it once again comes down to that split between the state capacity decay on the one side and communities organizing on the other one. The future of South Africa, I mean, it's difficult to make predictions about, especially about the future. But when it comes to South Africa particularly, I think there is one prediction that I can very confidently make, and that is the two-pronged approach. On the one side, state capacity decay will continue to decay. That I've seen no indications to the contrary, that the state will finally get its act together and that everything will be fine. As I said, this is the government that has been struggling to fix an electricity crisis for 18 years. I think that trend is going to continue. The government capacity to provide basic services like water, electricity, infrastructure maintenance, fighting crime, that's going to keep deteriorating. But the counterweight is going to keep increasing, and that is the counterweight of communities continuing to organize and becoming increasingly state-proof. We've seen it's not just, I mean, I don't want to create this impression that it's only AfriForum and the Solidarity Movement that is organizing communities. There are many other organizations out there that are also state-proofing or helping state-proof their communities and finding alternatives to service delivery and all the filling the void left by the government. That is a trend that is increasing in a positive way. Many communities all across South Africa have just started taking things into their own hands when it comes to basically solving the problems that the government should be solving, and communities of all backgrounds, black and white. So when it comes to the future, I think those two trends are going to continue. The state capacity decay on the other side, on the one side, the government is going to become increasingly irrelevant in South Africa at different paces as the circumstances change. And then on the other side, decentralization and state proofing on a community level is going to increase and is going to become increasingly complex. So there's a fascinating case study for those internationally on the outside looking in, whether you are interested in particularly the nature of collapse and the nature of the state deteriorating, as many of you on the outside are experiencing, as you mentioned earlier, even in your homeland of Britain, even in the United States, all across Europe, you're feeling that things are getting worse in regards to the performance of those various states and those various bureaucracies. Well, then you can learn a bit about from South Africa, because we're already a long way down the line of state capacity decay. And then on the other side is the positive lessons that you can learn from, well, what is the response to that problem as your countries, unfortunately, looks like increasingly South Africanized? Well, what is the response to South Africanization? Well, luckily, there are many organizations, communities, test cases in South Africa being, as I said earlier, stress tested under incredibly stressful my English is running out now. Under start to translate constantly, but I almost just used the Afrikaans word. My brain was like, they'll know what you mean. Under increasingly stressful circumstances. So when it comes to the good, there's good news and bad news. I don't want your listeners to walk away with just bad news that their countries are likely going to increasingly South Africanize. The good news outweighs the bad news. The good news is that the solution to South Africanization is already far down the line in development. And it's not just in the realm of ideas. We're not sitting around doing podcasts about what we're going to do about the problem. We're not just sitting around writing opinion pieces. We are actually pioneering and stress testing these ideas in the field, and we've been doing it for decades now, and increasingly so. So the good news that I want to end on is that you can learn from not just seeing the problem unfold in South Africa, but then also you can learn from not just the successes, I want to add, the mistakes as well that we have naturally made over the years and will continue to make, seeing as these are human initiatives. You can learn from those mistakes and from those successes, so that if your country finds itself in a more South Africanized state of being, you at least know how to react on a basic level. Doesn't mean that you can copy and paste what we do, but you can at least take what we do and adapt it for your own personal situation and context.
This has been very, very interesting, and obviously I wish you all the best, and good luck to everyone in South Africa, because can't be the easiest thing to go through, but it's nice to end on a nice positive note. I imagine that quite often these sorts of things bring communities together more than anything, and that's a nice positive way to end it. So final thing I wanted
That's
to
one of the
ask.
benefits. That's one of the benefits of living in troubling and trying times, is that you really see what the people around you are made of, and that there's a positive view in that, in regards to when things get very comfortable around you, you just see the worst of people. But when things get tough, when things get really bad, you genuinely do see the best of people coming to the fore, even if it is an organized minority. And that is one of the things that brings me gives me great heart in our situation.
And that's I didn't expect to go away feeling so positive after talking about South Africa's decline, but that's very nice. So where can people find you online? How can people support the work you're doing?
Right. So you can support the work that AfriForum does by supporting us at a link that I will give to the Lotus Eaters that you can put in the description of this episode. You can either become an international member, which is a new feature that we've added, or you can make a once-off donation to help fund state-proof solutions and state-proof experiments here at the southern tip of Africa. You are investing in your own future, as I said earlier, because you can fund the experiment, and then the results of the experiment can inform your own future actions. But then myself personally, well, you can find my content on X. I post under my name, Conscious Caracal, but that's just my brand there. I'm not anonymous. You're not going to be doxing me if you refer to me as Ernst. But then also on my YouTube channel, I do interviews with guests from South Africa and abroad, but with a specific focus on every episode or every interview that I do. I want to firstly make sure that it remains relevant, the topic that we talk about, for the next at least 5 or 10 years. I don't do current events. So if you want to see like current events analysis of like what the South African government did this week and my reaction, you're not going to see that. We're going to be talking about topics that I try to make relevant, not just for South Africa, but for the wider West simultaneously, so that my audience abroad and my audience locally in South Africa, according to my analytics, is pretty much 50-50 split in regards to my audience. That the topics that I discuss on my channel is relevant to both of those audiences every time. That's what I try to do with my channel, and that's also under the name Conscious Caracal. So you can find that on YouTube and on X, or on any podcast platform where you listen to podcasts. And then lastly, I think it's just broadly, it might sound a bit cheesy or lame, but I mean, what you really can do to help is just to continue talking about South Africa, continuing to inform people about what's going on here. Even as I said, it doesn't sound as dramatic or glamorous or glorious, but I mean, just simply, if you're in a conversation and people are talking just absolute nonsense about South Africa that you know is nonsense, correct them, not in a like a rude way, but in a genuine, like, critical way, and saying, I don't think that's the situation, and here's why I say that. And I can't tell you how many times I've encountered those types of just conversations being had by either expats, South African expats, or just people taking an interest in South Africa, informing other people around them. It does have a cumulative effect. So as I said, it sounds a bit like hippie, flowery, like, yeah, just talk about South Africa and that's how you can help us. But it genuinely does make a difference when a lot of people just correct the factual errors that they encounter on a daily, well, not on a daily basis, but on a regular basis, when South Africa is a topic of discussion. So that genuinely is something that you can do. It's not just screaming into the void. If you help get the truth about South Africa out there, it really makes a difference. And I've seen the difference as someone who lives here.
Well, that's great. And thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. I wish you all the best, and you're doing some great work. And I suppose, thank you. And I suppose you're going to continue on with much the same direction. And so I would encourage everyone watching this to check out your work as well.
Thank you very much, Josh. I appreciate it, and keep up the good fight there on your side of the big salty pond as well. I know you've got your own challenges, major challenges as a nation, as a people, and all the best to you. I think I'm glad to see that people, and we appreciate people on the outside looking into what's happening in South Africa, but do know that we are also paying attention to what's happening on your side of the Atlantic. We are not just focused here on particularly South Africa. South Africans in general are actually very outward focused often with our focus when we are looking at the issues all across the world, but we are keeping an eye on you guys there in Britain as well, and in the United States and other European countries too. And we wish you all the best.
Well, thank you very much. And I suppose I address the audience now. Thank you very much for watching this, and I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to check out your videos, your work, and support AfriForum. And goodbye.
All right, goodbye. Walk well.